Hi, good evening, everyone. If you can hear me, please go ahead and put a thumbs up in the chat if you can see me and hear me. Perfect. All right. Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. Some of you might already know me and know my colleague that is with me today from previous webinars, but if you don't already, my name is Dr. Teresa Cow. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Mitch Pohl, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we're super excited to talk to you guys about this topic today, discussing mental health with loved ones. And it's pretty timely too. I don't know if you guys are aware, but May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we want to talk to you guys all about, how to communicate with your loved ones, about whether it's your own mental health or whether it's, a loved one's mental health, and just how to approach that topic, because sometimes it can be a little bit taboo. Sometimes there can be a lot of barriers that get in the way. But before we dive into that, as always, we have a few housekeeping items to go over before diving into the topic. So first and foremost, this is a one-directional webinar, meaning that we're not able to see or hear you guys. You're only able to see and hear us. What that means is that the only option to communicate with us is through the chat box. And so throughout the presentation, we're going to ask that you communicate with us through there, and we do like live interaction. And so we'll be asking you guys questions, and that's a way, you can type your responses in the chat box. And if you guys have questions for us along the way, we'd be happy to answer them too. Another thing is that this is the last webinar of the series that we had for the spring, but we are planning to have a few more webinars for the summer, and so just be on the lookout for that. We do advertise it through, our community partners such as Saddleback College, and through some of the clubs that we're connected with. So just be aware of that. And then I just want to remind you guys about the raffle that we have. If you were present with us in the last couple of webinars, we had 8 lucky winners for each of the webinars who participated throughout the full duration of the webinar and completed the surveys, the survey that we have at the very end. And so same with this presentation, we'll choose 8 lucky winners to win a $25 Amazon gift card. So don't miss out on that. And let's see what else. Is there anything else? I think that's about it. Just to give you guys a brief introduction of Mitch and myself, we work at Mission Hospital in the adolescent intensive outpatient program called Aspire, and the young adult intensive outpatient program called Vibe. So we work with individuals, adolescents, and their families, as well as young adults who have moderate to severe levels of anxiety and depression. And so this topic that we're bringing to you guys today is really relevant because we know that even a lot of our patients have a lot of difficulty and barriers to talking about their own mental health with their loved ones for a lot of different reasons. So we, as mental health providers, we have really seen a increase in demand over the past year for mental health services. So for therapy, for example, we've seen a lot of people reaching out for help, which is a great thing. It kind of shows that basically more people are aware of, the need for support, and that they're seeking help because they need it. At the same time, though, there's still a lot of stigma, a lot of barriers that we are going to talk to you guys about today. And so it's important to really know how to talk to your loved ones about your own mental health, or about, their mental health, in ways that make it effective for, your relationship and for that interaction that you have. So let's get into this real quick. Let's talk about mental health statistics. Mental Health America and the CDC have, given and administered depression and anxiety screeners for hundreds and thousands of individuals. And what they've come up with basically from the beginning of last year to the beginning of this year is that there's been a really dramatic increase in individuals who have experienced anxiety and depression. And what we typically see is preteens and teenagers and young adults that are really targeted the most, where they experience the most moderate to severe levels of anxiety and depression and experience those suicidal thoughts, urges to self-harm or engaging in self-harm. And a lot of these individuals are really struggling with the sense of loneliness and isolation, which isn't necessarily surprising to us, given that the pandemic has required us to socially isolate and be away from our loved ones and readjust and adapt to, how we communicate and interact with other people. And so this webinar this series of webinars is usually geared towards young adults in the community, but I know that there's a lot of other people who have joined us. And so, me go back to this one, who have joined us. And so it's also really important to know that a lot of young adults really, really struggle a lot with their own mental health too. And so at this stage of life, right, young adults are going through a lot of different things, transitions and changes with jobs, careers, school, college. There's also relationship issues that come up, figuring out where they belong with their social group, developing romantic relationships that often are long lasting, and also dealing with a sense of personal responsibility and independence. And so that going along with a lot of the issues that came up throughout COVID, such as like unemployment and having to socially distance from loved ones, having to go to school online, having to just adapt and adjust to a lot of things over time has been really hard for young people, I would say, in this last year. So we have definitely seen an increase in demand of services. Again, that's a great thing. And at the same time, we're also wanting to advocate more and educate more. And so hopefully you guys are taking this information and also bringing it back to your loved ones. So let's talk really quickly about some college challenges too that a lot of us face when we want to share with other people about whether it's our own mental health or, we want to talk to our loved ones about their mental health. So one is, I know personally for me, a lot of family members who, aren't necessarily wanting to seek professional help, even though we know personally that they may be struggling really badly with depression, anxiety, and yet at the same time, either they feel like maybe they don't have a problem, or they might be resistant or opposed to seeking professional help for a myriad of reasons that they might have, right? That's one. And also, if you guys can put in the chat any other common challenges that you guys face too, whether it's, other people it's hard for you to share with other people about your own mental health, or, or vice versa. So you guys can go ahead and put that in the chat too, and we'll get to those. Another common challenge is maybe you want to share your own mental health issues with other people, but you're afraid that, your loved ones might belittle or invalidate what you're going through and say, oh, that's not a big deal. Like everybody deals with it, or they might criticize you, or culturally it's not necessarily appropriate to share these things, right? And we'll go into those barriers in a bit. But that fear of sharing this information with our loved ones can be a really big challenge for us to seek support from others. Another one is loved ones may often disregard or undermine professional help. So the idea that there are some people we know, that feel like therapy is not helpful, or they think that it's not something that is valuable, right? And so sometimes we run into that issue too, where they disregard the value of treatment and the value of seeking help. Another thing is not being able to access resources, or not knowing what the resources are that are available around you in the community, right? And so that also being a challenge to navigate as well. And then another thing is sometimes we worry about what it's going to be like when we face our issues, right? And I think a lot of times that is something that gets in the way of us seeking help, is not wanting to face our demons. And so sometimes it's better to just ignore it and not have to feel those things. So those are just some challenges. Let me see what you guys have written here in the chat box. So financial resources absolutely is a big barrier. Nurturers in the family often feel the pressure to always be the nurturer and not seek and ask help themselves. Absolutely, 100%. When you feel like you're the caretaker or the nurturer, as you put it, it's very hard to recognize your own need for support, right? And I always give the metaphor of, like when you're on a plane ride and they tell you to put on your own oxygen mask before you help someone else. And that's the same idea, is that if you want to be able to help someone else, you have to also be able to help yourself first, right? To be your best self for others. Family doesn't believe me, so I have stopped sharing. So yeah, so when families feel like, I hate to use the word, but like you're lying or you're faking it, right? Or that it's not really true, or that, you're being dramatic, right? I think a lot of times we kind of hear that from people who disregard and don't necessarily understand what we're going through. And that can be extremely hard. Can't see psychiatrist or therapist for several weeks due to being overbooked. Yeah, that and that just goes to show how much the demand of services has gone up since the pandemic, is that everyone's kind of booked, and that's definitely a barrier. Common challenge experiences excuses or denial about needing medical help. So I'm assuming that like wanting to help someone else that who needs help, but they're denying, being in denial about needing help. Absolutely. Feeling judged or being told that it's not a big deal. Yeah, again, that idea of feeling invalidated. Being a single mom, not having much time for therapy or anything else for that matter. So you're juggling a lot of different things, a lot of different responsibilities. And so absolutely, it's very hard to find time. Again, finances. What else here? Common challenge I faced in my family with loved ones that are, they're just people who are depressed are just lazy, or people just want to feel bad for them, right? So kind of when people think that someone is playing the victim in some sense, that can be very hurtful and very invalidating for people who actually really need the help. And then religion, yeah, that's something we'll talk about in just a second. Working on not pushing what I've learned in therapy on my family if they're not open to it. Yeah, that's actually really hard, because when you have so much knowledge and you know that maybe it works, and that it's helped you, and you just want to help everyone else around you, or just educate, right? And give some sort of insight or awareness to other people, but they're not open to it. Absolutely, that's a big barrier. Son is 29, suffers from anxiety, become dependent on alcohol, struggle with bringing it up for fear of being shut out. Yeah. I think a lot of times it's hard when people just, when there's an issue, a clear issue, but based on maybe previous experiences with that individual, it's, you're walking on eggshells, or that it's just very hard to talk to someone about their issues. Yeah. So all of these are really great points, you guys. Let's get into the more of the barriers and the stigma. So yeah, cultural factors is a big thing, right? There are so many, I would say a lot of collectivistic cultures, like Hispanic cultures, Asian cultures, where you keep it in the family, or it's, it's not good to really share your issues with the outside world, right? It's kind of goes with the second point there. Family pride is to save face. You don't want to show weakness to other people. You don't want to admit that there's anything wrong, because it's not within your culture to do so, right? And so that can absolutely be a big barrier. Generational differences too. Let's say you're a 20-year-old person and you're trying to talk to your grandparents about mental health, and they're just like, well, it is what it is, I'm stuck in my old ways, or whatever the case may be. Is that they're very traditional black and white thinking, and up to this point they haven't known what the transition and the progression of how mental health has come to be, and so it's very hard to also talk to certain people who are big age differences than you, right? Where their thought process is very traditional, less curious, less open-minded than you are, right? Religious beliefs. I think someone had mentioned that on the previous slide in the chat box. Yeah, absolutely. I think individuals who have a strong sense of faith is always, I think that so many people have found comfort in that, and that's actually a very good thing. I think sometimes it can become a barrier when that's the only thing that they believe is going to solve or resolve all of their issues, right? When they start to believe that there's no sense of your own locus of control to help your own circumstances, right? And then you leave it all to being God resolving everything. And I personally do come from a Christian background too, and I have my own faith. And at the same time, right, is if solely believing that God is going to, and we're probably not going to get into this because this could be a little bit, some issues come up, but the idea is basically that we do also have a sense of our own control over certain circumstances, right? And so religious beliefs can also get in the way sometimes. Also being taught not to show weakness. So a lot of us, when we were young, right, starting very young, told to suck it up. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, stop being a baby, right? Those things that we're taught at a very young age communicate certain messages to us that become problematic later in life when we feel as though we're actually stuck and we don't know what to do, right? And then that can lead us to feeling really hopeless and helpless about our situations. Confidentiality and trust is one thing too, where seeking out treatment, seeking out support is a huge deal. And for some people, especially if it's the first time, can be really, really scary. And one aspect about that is that you're going to meet with a complete stranger and you're going to tell them about your issues, and can I trust them? Can I trust that they're going to keep my information private? Can they actually help me? And so those questions are really big things that people do face that often get in the way of seeking treatment too. Having a hard time identifying symptoms. So for each person, mental health looks different for each person, right? Symptoms manifest differently. Even in some cultures, they don't identify as having depression or anxiety. They don't necessarily know that verbiage or that clinical, term and what that means or what that really looks like. And so sometimes if we don't know necessarily what's going on with us, then we might not know what kind of help we need, right? Preference for self-reliance. So that's the idea of, also like if you learned at a very young age that you have to be really independent, that you can't rely on anybody else, you can only rely on yourself. That's a lot of pressure to figure everything out on your own, and so If that's the case, if that's our mentality that we can only rely on ourselves to help ourselves and trust ourselves to get through things, at the point where you, again, feel completely stuck, that can feel really hopeless and helpless. There are often misconceptions of mental health. So, I think we might know some people who feel like seeking treatment or going to therapy is only for crazy people, and I think that's absolutely a misconception, because so many people go to therapy just to better their relationships, to figure out who they are, to explore a lot of things that in the end is beneficial and crucial for them to really live well-meaning lives, and so the idea that therapy is only for crazy people is something that I think, again, we're trying to break that mental health stigma, and the more we can educate people, the more we can bring awareness to individuals and share our own experiences, sometimes that can be a really helpful thing. Similarly, lack of insight and knowledge and understanding. Sometimes ignorance can be inadvertently harmful to some people, and I think sometimes people really just don't know. They really are unaware, don't have the knowledge or the information, and that's where we kind of come in to educate and help people understand a little bit more. And then again, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier too, is minimal access to care. So some underserved populations really don't have access to resources as well. Financial issues, they don't know what the resources are in the community, and so that can be a big block in their road to recovery too. So these are some barriers that that we typically see as mental health providers. Are there other things that you guys have come into conflict with or have noticed in your own relationships with other people as you've tried to either help them, or other people have tried to help you, and there have been some barriers there? Go ahead and identify those in the chat box too. No. Okay. We can always come back to this as well if you guys come up with certain things. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Employer doesn't understand the need for help. Yeah. There are some organizations that have EAP employer assistance programs, but not all companies have that. And yeah, a lot of times bosses, managers, employers don't really get that we're struggling, right? And then Alexandra says, sometimes coming off as too positive can frustrate the other person, and I have a hard time, oops, where did it go? A hard time giving advice without sounding overly optimistic. Yeah. I can absolutely see that happening too, where, maybe we have a very positive and just positive view on things and a positive perspective. And so sometimes it's hard when we're trying to work with someone who thinks more pessimistically, right? People would react to my problems. My comment is people would react to my problems and needing help. I worry if people would reject me. Yeah, that's absolutely a common experience as well, where we're fearing rejection, right? If we're sharing this deep, dark, vulnerable personal information about ourselves, right? Dad went to med school. He convinced that exercise will solve all mental health issues. Even though I've tried it and it doesn't work, I still feel anxious. He sends me articles about how therapy doesn't work and how exercise is always the answer. Makes me feel like he doesn't understand me. Yes, I can tell you a lot of the parents that we work with also have a really hard time understanding their kids' mental health issues as well, in that they think there's a one set solution, right, for all of this that is different than trying to understand where all of this is coming from and working through that, right? friends tell me to take all sorts of herbal supplements and that have worked for them and don't think medication is a good resource. Okay. Absolutely. Sister has been manic recently and it's hard to talk to her. She's in denial that anything's wrong. And I try to help and give advice, but she takes it the wrong way. Sometimes people are also not in the right mind state, right, to receive certain information too. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Being high functioning so people don't believe you deal with mental illness. That's a really great point. Sometimes depression doesn't have a face. Anxiety doesn't really have a face, right? We often mask what we're experiencing. And at the same time, if we are high functioning, right? Like if we're still holding our jobs, if we're still going to school, if we still have our relationships, right? People don't think that you're struggling because it looks so, you look fine on the outside, right? And so a lot of times it's hard for people to recognize that someone is struggling. Okay, great points, you guys. I'm going to go ahead and pass on the baton to Mitch to continue the show.
Awesome. Yeah, on that point of, being high functioning or appearing high functioning, so maybe people don't notice as much, right? We see that, for example, with people with ADD, right? Maybe not the hyperactive, but ADD where it's the inattentiveness. And so people can be doing well in school, grade school, middle school, high school for a long time, and be struggling in ways that other people don't see, just to get the grades that they're getting. And the same thing with anxiety and depression, right? We may be functioning and everybody thinks on the outside we're all right. They don't understand what we're up against just to try to put that face out to the world, just to try to accomplish what we feel like a lot of times we're barely accomplishing. Difficult to do that if it's not obvious, right? And so being misunderstood, that's a really great point. So let's talk about the signs to look out for, because sometimes on that note, there are things that are visible to the outside world, and it might cue us to realizing that there is something going on here. And in the theme of our webinar here, we can maybe start the conversation, which we'll get to next. But what are some of the signs that might start us paying attention and just asking, getting curious, and maybe giving someone that chance to voice, hey, this is not just a one-off thing. There really is something going on here. So for depression and anxiety, we'll go through some symptoms that show up. Low mood, which is really, I'm feeling down, is really what we're trying to say. Feeling down, the sadness, irritability is actually a sign of depression. And I think that that's one that doesn't always get talked about. However, if we're really sad, or we're frustrated with ourselves, or we're frustrated with the way life is going, or frustrated with the way that life isn't going, things aren't the way that we want them to be. All of that is actually, that comes out as irritability, is actually a sign of depression, a really telltale sign of depression. And if you think about it, the way I always like to put it to my clients, if you're having a great day, are you going to react as irritably towards someone as if you're having a bad day? And same thing if you're depressed, and this is, depression, this was just been going and going and going, that irritability is there, and it can often build up. And people can actually attack us and misunderstand us. Why are you so mad, right? Like we chose that. And sometimes we can turn that frustration on ourselves. And really that's there because we're sad, or because we're depressed, because we're struggling. Crying being another sign, of course. With anxiety, you have the fidgeting and the shaking. And again, that can be a sign of I'm sitting there at my desk and my legs are always moving, or I'm always fidgeting with something, tapping my fingers all the time. Some of us are naturally like that. And others, it's a sign that, hey, there's something going on subconsciously, right? And again, you think about it. If a situation itself is causing you to be anxious, you're likely to see these symptoms. If these things are going on and you're not necessarily thinking about something anxious that makes you anxious, okay, is there something going on beneath the surface, right? Panic attacks, and that can take many forms, of course, right? Shortness of breath, tightness in chest, dizziness, everything feels like it's whirring around, moving around. And so panic attacks, again, a lot of symptoms, takes a lot of forms there, really debilitating when they strike. Very difficult to deal with panic attacks and still keep doing what you're trying to do. Self-critical or self-doubt comments, right? And these might be something when we're talking about signs to look out for, something that somebody voices. If you try to give compliments or you're giving somebody feedback and it's a really self-critical comment, or someone doesn't really has voiced that they don't think they have what it takes, they can't do it, I never do anything right. Signs of depression, right? Overeating or undereating, right? Depression and anxiety can cause higher appetite to try to help us cope, or lower appetite, right? I just don't feel like eating. Insomnia or hypersomnia, right? It can be either difficulty getting out of bed or difficulty going to bed in the first place, right? Because those racing thoughts are going on. And other times just depression and anxiety, they wear you out. And anxiety, it's not only the mental gymnastics that you go through, also we do carry our stress in different parts of our body. Carry it in your shoulders. And that's like getting a workout for your shoulders over the course of the day. You're going to wear yourself out by the end of the day, and you're going to need even more time to recover. Difficulty getting out of bed, I think that's a very common one. However, it's different than I'm just exhausted because it's been a long and tough few days, or my bed is really warm, right? When we're talking about the depression aspect of it, what's the point of getting out of bed? I have nothing and I have no one to look forward to. The day in front of me seems like a mountain that I cannot climb, right? These would be things going on that tell us there's something other than just it's cold outside and my bed is warm, right? Low motivation or avoidance of daily tasks. This is the one somebody had mentioned earlier. You're saying depression is just people saying that you're lazy, right? And they don't understand that with that depression and even with that anxiety, it is so difficult for me to find motivation because I'm usually struggling with hope. I'm struggling with empowerment, with a sense of empowerment. And so I am struggling with the motivation, and I'm probably going to avoid things. I don't have the energy. I don't see the point, right? And that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from laziness. If we were actually able to work with the depression, we see people's energy levels go up. We see their motivation go up. It had nothing to do with laziness. I like to say that, what most people refer to laziness is where somebody chooses different goals, chooses different priorities. You don't choose depression. Lack of hygiene and self-care. It's very hard to take care of ourselves when we have that lack of energy, when we have a difficulty seeing like, what's the point? Social withdrawal, obviously in isolation. Again, this could be social anxiety, or being around people wears me out even more. And also we tend to see that as we lose our sense of purpose in life, we're going to go further and further from engagement with other people or engagement in anything. And obviously deterioration in school and work performance. These are all, school and work are higher functioning elements of our life. And if we're struggling to take care of some of the basic things, some of our basic needs, if we're struggling at that core level, of course, we're not going to be able to function on a higher level. Congratulations, you're normal. Nobody would be able to do that. It's not just you. So if you guys have some other signs that you've noticed that we have not listed here, please post those, and we'll go ahead and go on to the next one, which is the signs that we might not notice. These are more of the internal signs. And let me pull up the chat real quick so I can see. Okay, perfect. But these are the signs that people might not notice on the outside, or if we're wondering, we may not notice that that somebody is struggling with this. And so the difficulty concentrating, right? There are some signs of that we might notice on the outside. However, that might be one that's harder to notice if you're on the outside looking in. Is that difficulty concentrating? I think even ourselves sometimes, we might read the same sentence 10 times over. I might be having a tough time sitting at my desk and getting this done. And I'm getting frustrated at myself going, why am I struggling so much to do this? And you realize, well, wait, I'm having trouble concentrating because I'm super exhausted, because I'm focused on this, this, and this, because what's the point, right? And so there's that difficulty concentrating that comes with it. Forgetfulness and difficulty remembering things. Your brain is kind of like a fuel tank on a car. And so if we've used up or are close to using up the brain's functioning, right? Because we're focused on so many different things, or because we didn't even get a chance to refuel it with depression. But the brain fog, absolutely, that's what it can feel like, right? Because we're struggling with anxiety and depression. Of course, again, you're not going to have that higher level functioning, which is the ability to recall, store and recall things. Again, that's normal to have that difficulty, to have that brain fog, absolutely. Loneliness. Sometimes it's hard to tell that people are lonely. And it may be because when we're engaging with them, they seem like they're doing okay. We don't necessarily know what happens when they go home. We don't even know that they're home alone, right? Or we don't even know that maybe their needs for social intimacy or personal intimacy aren't being met. And so loneliness is a hard one to tell. We got to ask more questions to find that that's what's going on. And we have the hopelessness and helplessness is almost always difficult to show. And I'm going to go back to what Teresa said earlier. That's one that takes a lot of vulnerability to open up about. Do we have people that we can open up and tell them, hey, I'm feeling hopeless, I'm feeling helpless? That takes a lot of vulnerability. That's one that a lot of times people are not going to feel comfortable talking about. Self-hatred and worthlessness. Again, as we said on the last slide, sometimes that's explicitly voiced, and other times that is the constant critical voice that goes with anxiety. It goes with depression, not something that necessarily people are going to give voice to and talk about. We talked about the tiredness, the low energy, the lethargy, but that's again something that somebody may show at home. They may not show at work. They may not show with their friends, right? Feeling misunderstood. Again, do we feel like we can voice that to others? Not always. Intrusive thoughts. That's a big one. We don't tend to show that to other people. We're anxious enough about it. We struggle enough with it. How do I voice this to someone else? Feeling dissociated from reality, right? I think for some people, they might describe that as brain fog. And for other people, it's just, you almost feel like you're moving in a dream sometimes. You feel like you're weighed down. Some people have described it that way. Sometimes I had a client tell me a number of weeks ago, I'm driving and I feel like I'm looking around, almost not belonging to the world, right? I'm here in the present, but it's what's going on, right? We have disconnected from others and experiences. It's very difficult to connect if my mind is somewhere else, if I really don't have the ability to draw on those positive feelings. I'm struggling to connect with people. Shame and guilt, huge ones. And again, we can direct that and turn that on ourselves. Sometimes it's also situations in our lives. I'm not able to be there for people like I want to. I'm not able to get things done like people are telling me I should be able to do. I have past regrets. I have current regrets. All of those things can drive anxiety and depression. And then when the guilt and the shame come in, and the other symptoms on top of that, makes us even more guilty, even more ashamed. Suicidal thoughts, of course. And this can be what we would call the passive thoughts, right? I think it'd be better if I wasn't here. All the way to the more active thoughts. I should kill myself, right? And this all says that something's wrong, that we have lost a sense, and it can be one of these things, it can be all of these things. I've lost a sense of hope. I've lost a sense of control, right? For the present, for the future. I don't like the way that my life is, and I'm not sure that I can change it. Life is not going the way I want it to. Everything is negative. All of these things can drive the suicidal thoughts, right? Feeling that numbness, of course. And we would say that with that numbness, sometimes that is the inability to feel anything, not just positive emotions, but sometimes I feel like anhedonia. I don't feel anything at all. I'm just walking through the day almost like a zombie. And finally, urges to engage in maladaptive behaviors in order to cope with anxiety and depression. And we talk about maladaptive behaviors. We're talking about ways of coping that are not the most constructive and healthy ways for us, right? And this could be self-harm, alcohol, drugs, sex, in ways that are not healthy, or not recreational, right? These are ways of trying to cope with anxiety and depression. Let's see, I'll read through the comments here. No motivation for intimacy. Yeah, absolutely. And whether that's interpersonal or sexual intimacy, absolutely. That is one of the first things to go, right? Is not having that motivation, that drive, that desire. We saw brain fog there. Yeah, I agree that, and that's a great point. It takes a lot of energy to reach out for help. And yeah, people don't, and this is why I wish so many people could see this slide. And that's where we want to point out the first one, is because it would really be helpful if people could reach out and say, hey, I kind of noticed this. Is everything okay? Right? Somebody to take that first step. I think it's difficult. Yeah, when we're down, when we're struggling, when we're anxious, it takes a lot more energy to reach out. It also takes a lot of vulnerability to reach out. And when we've poured ourselves out, which can be exhausting in and of itself, I know with a lot of people, they wonder, what's the response going to be, right? What am I going to get the help that I need? Because it's so difficult and it's so exhausting and it's so vulnerable to pour myself out. Is this even going to be worth it? And sometimes it helps open that door when somebody asks us and shows that they care. So yeah, I think it would be nice if somebody would reach out and somebody would notice. I agree with you 100%, 1,000%. So difficult to tell if a person is usually quiet and reserved. Yeah, and we see that all the time in my work with kids, adolescents, and adults. If somebody is more reserved, more introverted naturally, it is extremely difficult to tell. And those are the ones where usually it'll get to a crisis point before anybody actually notices, right? That it's definitely very common there. So, okay. And if you guys have any other signs that might not be noticed, might be more internal, please feel free to comment on those. So how to encourage others about mental health. This is going along with that comment of, I wish that people would reach out. I wish my family would understand. Sometimes it's going to take us starting the conversation, right? And of course, all of you are here. You're in this webinar, which is awesome. And so sometimes the change starts with us. And I have worked with a number of clients, all kinds of backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, race, culture backgrounds, religious backgrounds. And sometimes it's the person who's in therapy that catalyzes the change within the family, right? Not that it happens right away. It can happen though, starting the change within your friends. We've had a number of teens in this program say, I finally reached out to a friend and opened up and it went really well. And then that friend started opening up to me, right? Somebody had to start it. And if somebody hadn't started it, who knows what would have happened, right? Maybe they never would have started. So how to encourage others to talk about mental health and start opening up. Being curious and open-minded. So this goes with when I see that something's going on, not accusing someone, not assuming it's something, and just asking. And so if it's, you notice your brother or you notice your friend has not been joining you guys for hangouts, saying, hey, look, I don't know if it's because you've been busy lately or what's going on, just wanted to check in and we miss you. Why haven't you been joining us? Something like that. Tell me what's going on. Would it be better for us to catch up one-on-one? I'd love to see you and come over, right? But just asking those questions in a non-combative, not in an interrogation way, right? We're not here to interrogate anyone, but just in a warm way, kind of opening up and saying, hey, look, I miss you. I care about you. I noticed this. you want to talk about it? What's going on? I'd like to hear what's going on with you. Doing research, learning and asking questions. And so sometimes somebody might let something slip. Oh, I had a friend of mine die and I've just really been feeling sad. And I think the common thing when somebody starts to open up to us is we're not sure what to say or what to do. And I'd say two things on that. This is your first research. Number one, just listening to someone, providing empathy and validation is the most important first step. You don't have to solve someone's problem. And in fact, most of the time, people don't want you to solve their problems, at least not right away, which is a really hard thing to accept. And I totally get that. The best thing that we can do is just to listen and let people know that we're there first. And that's empathy and that's validation. So no worries if somebody starts talking and you're like, I'm not sure what to do with this. I'm not sure how to help them feel less anxious or feel less depressed. That's okay. Even as therapists, we're not sure how to do that first, second session at times. That's all right. And I had a professor of mine back in the day say, when you're not sure what to do, just ask questions. Let them know that you care. Listen. Hell, that's good advice even when I do know what to do sometimes. So just doing that first, and then it gives you the chance to step away, do some research, do some digging, right? Ask other people, hey, my friend's struggling with this. What would you suggest? What's worked for you? What's worked for someone else, right? If you have your own counselor, right? Talking to your counselor. Just being able to step away and say, hey, let me see if I can figure out some ways to talk about this with other people. And maybe just learning about it. If you've never been exposed to what they're talking about before, kind of learn about it first. Recognizing and tracking the signs, right? And that's kind of being on top of and monitoring. Oh, do I see some of these things showing up? Rather than wait and see for 6 months, are they going to just kind of get over it and feel better? Maybe we ask more towards the beginning of that. Support groups for parents and families. These take a variety of forms. You have support groups for all kinds of struggles, issues. There's grief, there's alcohol, there's anxiety, depression, anything related to sexuality. There are so many different support groups. And what I love about the group work that we do and what I love about support groups is that it, first of all, lets you know that you're not alone. And that's a big one. And then there are other people who are going through the same thing who understand you, number one, and number two, can provide some good advice and good input if and when someone is ready. So highly recommend support groups on that one. Being a part of their treatment. If someone's attending therapy and it's like, hey, can I help you with accountability? Can I be a conversation for you throughout the week, right? What are you working on? And we can have a discussion about that. Maybe I can even try it with you, right? If you're trying to apply a skill, for example, of getting out of bed by 8 o'clock every day, you know what? I'll get out of bed at 8 o'clock with you too. And we'll call each other at 8:05 to see how it's going. I had a client do that in the past, right? Cool. Things like that, like offering to be part of what they're working on in treatment. Seeking out the resources, right? Community resources are often a thing. And that's not just support groups, but let's say someone needs help with some food or clothing or finance options, right? Those resources as well, religious resources. Helping somebody find those resources sometimes can make a big difference. Safe and positive home environment. That's obviously just being nurturing, not obviously. That's being nurturing and supportive, right, of what someone is going through. We see that all the time, that we may not always understand. We may not even necessarily agree with what's going on. Just trying to be as positive, as empowering, as validating as possible. And somebody knowing that they can count on you to just support them in that way can make all the difference in the world. Monitoring safety and risk issues. Calling 911, the CAT team, which is a crisis team, to consult and assess when needed. One of the things I see is sometimes we think if we're talking to people about their struggles, that then they become our responsibility. Like their safety becomes our responsibility. And that is too much for anybody to take on, right? Unless you're the counselor. And even with counselors, right, we're seeing at a certain level, no, this needs to be in other hands to help keep them safe and protect them and help them protect themselves. And so that's the idea, is that if I'm talking to somebody and I'm worried about their safety, it's not up to you to ensure their safety, right? Day to day, hour to hour, day to day. And so the idea is knowing that you can call 911, knowing that you can call the CAT team to go out there and make sure that they're safe, and to take further steps to keep them safe if needed. You don't need to do that. And I think that's too much to take on there. Becoming an advocate for mental health, right? And whether that is going to marches, that's donating, that's talking with your family and friends. There are ways big and small that we can advocate and start to spread the word. I worked in community mental health for a few years. And I, like I told the story earlier, I would notice that somebody would come home after going to therapy, and they might have gotten a lot of times they got criticism in the beginning. People started seeing the changes, and they said, yeah, well, this is, and the way I would always put it to clients was to say, well, you know, this is your mental and emotional health. If you break an ankle, you go to a doctor, and there's no shame, there's no stigma. They put a cast on, it heals up, you're good to go. You go on with your life the way it was before. With our mental and emotional health, we have experiences in life that have sprained and broken our hearts and our minds. And there's no shame in saying, I'm going to do what I need to do to get the healing to set myself back on track. And so clients would tell me, I'm 6 months in, you know, we're into treatment, and oh yeah, my mom signed up to come in the other day. She's been seeing the changes. She's been seeing that it worked. And I was telling her that analogy, and she was willing to come in. Cool. That's a form of advocacy, is telling other people about how beneficial this can be, right? And starting to change it from a dialogue where there's stigma and there's misunderstanding to promoting that understanding. And it's consistency with that, because nobody's usually going to immediately, when you say it, go, oh yeah, I guess everything I believed for 40 years was wrong. You know, not usually, right? It takes time, it takes consistency, and sometimes they have to see the changes in someone else for them to be able to accept that. Talking to treatment providers and school staff. We see that sometimes in the school setting. We have to advocate for people to get assistance at the school. And so sometimes if this is you advocating for your kids, or advocating for your friends in some way, if you need to go with them to an appointment, or you need to talk to the school because, you know, your kids are in treatment. If you need someone to talk to, we had somebody earlier, like maybe employers don't understand that you need help. Do you need an advocate, mental health advocate, legal advocate to come in and help advocate for you and step up and help you get the assistance you need? Okay, then that's a good thing to do. Providing active listening and validation, which I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. But just really showing that we're interested, asking questions, providing validation, and letting people know that we're there. This encourages people to share more, because it might be a sentence or two at the beginning. And if you show you're curious and you show you care, people are more willing to open up. And finally, just being a model of all of these things. If we want people, one of the things I say, if we want people to be kind to themselves, are we kind to them first? If we want people to be open with us, are we open to them, right? If we want people to take care of themselves, are we showing that we take care of ourselves too? Otherwise, it kind of rings empty when we say something, right? So I think that's important to encourage others to have the conversation about and to engage in mental health. Any questions and comments on this one before we move forward? I'll give it a minute while you guys type stuff in.
Can I just emphasize one thing that you said that was super important and helpful, is that sometimes when I come into contact with individuals who are a little bit more resistant to the idea of therapy, the idea of treatment, it is helpful to give those analogies and metaphors that are more practical for them to think about, if they're thinking more logically, rationally. So like the ankle example that you gave, Mitch, same for any kind of physical illness or physical health, right? If someone is diagnosed with cancer, you're hopefully not ignoring it, right? You're going to treat it. Right? If your car breaks down or like gets a flat tire or runs out of gas, right? The idea is you're gonna try to fix the problem so that your car can function again. And so when we come into contact with individuals who maybe don't get it or have a little bit of a harder time agreeing with the purpose and the utility and the benefits of mental health services and therapy and getting treatment, like some of those metaphors and analogies can be really helpful. Just wanted to reemphasize that.
Yeah, awesome. We got from Teresa, can you give us some icebreakers on how to see therapy is going? Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on the person that you're asking, right? As I was reading that, I can think of a few friends of mine and definitely a family member that I could literally just go up and be like, hey, how's therapy going? And I think maybe because they're more open, they also know that I'm a therapist. And so of course I'm going to be curious about, how they're doing and how the experience has been. Other people, they may kind of go, why are you asking? Right. And so you may have to clarify. I know just when some people have kind of shared other people checking in on them, it's, hey, how have you been feeling? Has therapy been working for you? And sometimes it doesn't feel as intrusive if it's how's therapy been working for you. Because I think some people, when you ask how's therapy going, they kind of expect you to share what you're talking with your therapist about. And that's why confidentiality exists, right? So sometimes it's, has therapy been helping you? And other times I think it's just, it can start off from a completely different angle. How are you doing? Right? I know you shared you were feeling really sad a few weeks ago and you went to a therapist. How are things going now? I'd like to check in with you and listen. And sometimes it's just organically going to come up. Yeah, I've been talking with my therapist. It's been helpful. It hasn't been helpful. We've been talking about this. We haven't. Or I've just been starting to do this. And I think as you see those changes, you'll kind of know how therapy is going, right? So sometimes it's just coming at it from a different angle, just to check in, where you don't necessarily explicitly mention therapy. Just, hey, how are you feeling? I'd like to check in again. Love to hear an update on how you're feeling. I've been thinking about you. Let me know if that helps, or if there's maybe some other ways I can weigh in on that. And then Alice, any health insurance plans that cover therapy or mental health insurance? Yeah, so a lot of the insurance companies, in fact, I would say virtually all of the insurance companies will offer some kind of coverage for therapy. It just depends on your insurance company because there's different deductibles, different copays that might have to be met. Some are willing to cover only a certain amount of time for higher levels of care. And sometimes they'll have certain just individual outpatient therapists that are covered and some that aren't. So I think the best thing to do is to call your insurance company and find out what the extent of their coverage is and what you'd be paying out of pocket. So hopefully that's helpful there. Even if you have Medi-Cal, Medi-Cal has will usually go through community mental health organizations, and even Medi-Cal will cover a certain amount of mental health. So again, hopefully that's helpful. Let me know if I can weigh in more on that. And otherwise, we'll go to the next slide as we kind of wrap up. So how to talk to family members, paying attention to the signs, validating feelings, thoughts, and experiences. We talked about some of those signs earlier, right? And just being validating towards people, which I feel like we've touched on this a lot, right? But offering those validating statements, even asking a question, a curious question is a validating statement. Offering to listen, not just jumping into giving advice, People can feel so much better just knowing that someone's there to listen. And I think we had some comments up there about that. Just listening sometimes works for me. Yeah, absolutely. Open, honest, and non-judgmental conversations. I love seeing that. Yes, that's what we're talking about here. Asking open-ended questions. So, for example, are you having a really bad day today? Right? Is more of a yes or no. Instead, an open-ended question might be, hey, you seem really down. What's been going on? Right? That gives people the option to elaborate more. And again, we want to ask it in a manner that it doesn't make it seem like it's an interrogation. Kind of a deal. No one likes an interrogation unless we're in a spy movie. And even then, targeted questions, just kind of picking out like, sometimes a certain thing, again, like I've noticed you're kind of feeling down. Is everything okay? We see this a lot with teens. If the parents just come up and go, hey, how was your day? That's the number one way, or at least the number two way to get a teenager upset with you, right? And sometimes that carries over when we're an adult and we're anxious and depressed. Somebody gives me an open-ended question. Where do I start? No, everything's not okay. I can tell you 50 things that are going wrong, right? But if someone instead were to jump in and go, hey, you seem sad today. What happened? Maybe that just targeting the sadness part of it gives us an idea of what we can talk about, right? So targeting it a little bit more. Expressing concern and encouragement, letting people know we care. There's always that old phrase that says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's why we don't jump to problem solving first. Let people know that you care, right? And so offering that encouragement and that concern. Treatment support, as we mentioned earlier, if someone needs help, whether that's being driven to sessions or someone to check in on them during the week, doing that. Using the Dear Man skill. Dear Man is a DBT skill. You can Google that. You can go on YouTube and look up Dear Man, but that's a really constructive way of organizing our conversations. And so the Dear, DEAR, it's an acronym. That's the steps that we follow in every conversation. And the MAN, the MAN are all things that we're going to keep in mind. I think for the sake of time, we won't necessarily dive into that too far, but that is a really constructive way, especially if both people are on board, to express our concerns, to express our needs, to express what's going on. Checking your defenses. That's mindfulness. And just being able to realize, am I getting triggered here? Am I starting to get defensive? Just realizing that helps us have a more constructive response rather than our automatic response, which might not always be constructive, because then we can criticize and things like that. Sharing your own experiences. That's a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes we share and someone can feel like that we're minimizing, right? And so at the same time, sometimes we can share our experiences, not to minimize someone, not to take over the conversation, to normalize it instead. And so you can tell that someone's feeling really down and depressed and God, I just don't know why I'm feeling this way. Hey, you know what? Actually, I've had that experience before too. I struggled with this and this and this. So I totally feel you. It's not just you. I had that too. And maybe sharing that clearly and briefly lets them know that they're not alone, opens them up to really share more. And just normalizing seeking help, right? That it's okay to do that. Everybody does that. Again, with my thing earlier, we go to a doctor if we have a sprain, if we have a break. If I got a broken heart, I can go to an emotions and a thoughts doctor, so to speak, which would be a therapist, or Dr. Cow, who's actually a doctor. And just starting slow and building up. Don't necessarily expect somebody to completely change their views the first time you have a conversation. Don't expect anybody to just open up and pour everything out to you on the first try. They may not even open up to you the first 5 times. It's walking that line between I'm being annoying and I'm making sure I keep the door cracked open, right? Listening to understand, not just to reply. Yes, well said. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And with that, I will turn it over to Teresa.
All right. Thanks, Mitch. So we are about finished here, and we want to wrap up just for the sake of time. We want to be mindful of your guys' time, but any last thoughts or questions that you guys might have, you can type it in the chat box real quick, or you guys can always email us. So I put some community resources here for you guys, same as the last webinar that we provided to you guys as well. So the VIBE program is the program that we work with. It's the young adult program for individuals who suffer from more moderate to severe levels of anxiety and depression. And that's the phone number there for you, the email there for you. If you know any individuals that can benefit from a program like this, it's mostly group-based therapy, 3 to 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, really intensive treatment that is really beneficial for individuals who just need more of that support than once a week or twice a week therapy. Then for young adults who really want like life skills workshop, independent life skills groups and things like that, the Family Resource Center provides a workshop there. Hidden Strength Behavioral Health also does, and then Wellness Center South does as well. Western Youth Services provides mental health services up to age 21 for, I believe, lower cost. OCAPICA, I believe that stands for Orange County Asian Pacific Islander. I do not remember the last 2 letters, but basically they do provide free counseling and case management services. So they'll connect you with community resources for housing, job searching, I believe, free counseling for, I believe, 10 sessions. So that is really helpful too if we're struggling with finances and trying to find support. And then these other hotlines here: domestic violence hotline, child protective services, national suicide prevention hotline. If you guys don't have those numbers already, please take them down. You don't know who you might run into that might need it, or if you need it yourself, please reach out to those resources. Okay. Let me see, someone mentioned in the chat here. Very informative. Thank you. Look forward to more of these. As mental health professionals, do you have unique challenges when talking about mental health with loved ones? Yeah, we run in, I can speak for myself personally. I run into these issues myself with other family members. And so absolutely, it's just because we're mental health professionals doesn't mean that, you know, we're not like the rest where we struggle with the same issues. April says, I learned a lot of helpful information. I'm also doing the webinar for my psychology extra credit, although I'm not sure if this one is also considered. Is it? I'm not sure exactly which webinar you had mentioned to your professor, but I mean, this is a mental health, understanding mental health webinar series. So yes, I would think that this counts for you. All right, you guys, so for the sake of time, I'm going to close out so that you guys can do the survey. And remember, if you do the survey, then you get a chance to win the $25 gift card. And be on the lookout for our next webinars for the summer, okay? Thanks so much, you guys. Have a good night.
Take care, everybody.